Let's just fill in the natural history of beavers so that people understand what a remarkable and strange creature this is.
So we can start with family, right? They seem to mate for life. You've got a mom and a dad, and not very sexually dimorphic. You can't really tell the difference. Some biologists have figured out a method. You turn the beaver upside down and you squeeze their butt and you sniff, and it either smells like diesel or cheese. And
really?
Yeah. So, a true beaver biologist, if they know the diesel or cheese. So you can't really tell mom or dad apart. Then they'll have like 2 to 4 young ones on average a year. And the young ones stick around for a year or two. So you've got teenagers, helpers, right? And so some colonies can be 12 individuals or more. And they're territorial. They've got an area of vegetation and water that they're managing actively. And they manage it together. I mean, I guess that's what made me think about it, as you're thinking about, this animal intelligently building a dam. It's 12 animals.
It's even better than intelligently building. It's intelligently collaborating on a project in which everybody's got to do their part right.
Yep. And there's no foreman.
Right.
And they do a lot of digging too. So beaver, they're very graceful in the water. They're not graceful on land. And they can be 60 pounds of slow-moving protein, right? I mean, anything they would love to eat a beaver. So they flood landscapes to stay protected from predators. Wolves were a big predator historically.
Yep.
Bears, big predator. In my area, cougars are probably one of the main predator, aside from, of course, humans now.
Right.
And in my area, the humans were a predator for a long time too. Beavers were eaten. So you've got this tight-knit family. They are interested in keeping the big kitties at bay by flooding the landscape, right?
Yep.
And depending on the landscape, then they'll build a structure to live in. And if they flooded the landscape all the way to the sides of the valley, well, then, they don't breathe underwater. They need a dry space. They'll build themselves up a lodge. And it's this freestanding mound of sticks and mud. And it has an underwater entrance, right? Kind of a front door. And sometimes it'll have many cavities in it. Sometimes they have kind of a mud room, like dry your feet off and then come up to the main chamber.
I think I know which beaver thought of that. It's the mother. No, there's no reason to track all that mud into the rest of the lodge.
I've crawled up into one of these one time, and they smell lovely, like crushed willow.
Do they really?
Yeah. Beavers kind of have a willowy scent. It's not the rodent scent that triggers the human brain, like, oh, this is something that could give me a disease.
That rat scent.
No, there's none of that. There's not even an undertone of that. It's a crushed willow smell.
Yeah, that's great. That's surprising to me.
Yeah.
But I get it. Okay, so they've got the big enough chamber for you to get in.
Indeed. Yeah.
And you're not tiny.
No, I'm not tiny. I'm crazy enough to crawl into a beaver lodge.
Yeah, apparently.
Yeah, so they have this lovely little lodge, and in areas that freeze over winter, they'll pack a bunch of vegetation down in their pond as a larder to eat off of once the ice forms.
So this is wood or woody material.
Yep. So
the environment softens it up over time, or no?
There's discussion around like what it sitting in the water does.
Right.
The main hypothesis for a long time has just been like accessibility when the ice forms.
Got it.
Right.
Well, that certainly makes a prediction that where the ice doesn't form, they will do less or none of it.
Yep. And we see that kind of borne out.
You do?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. They also, and kind of a knock-on effect of this collection of wood. So you think about a rodent that's obsessively taking vegetation from outside the stream and adding it into the stream.
So just for the sake of filling this in for people who haven't spent much time in beaver habitat.
Yeah.
You've got beavers will put in a investment over what must be weeks on a very large log. right? I've seen that.
Oh, I see. One big tree.
One big tree,
Totally.
which has to be on the shore and has to be leaning in such a way that they can predict that it will fall into the water enough that they can then swim it to wherever they need
It's a lot easier if it falls in the water.
A lot easier if it falls in the water. There's presumably nothing they can do with a large tree if it falls out of the water.
They will utilize it.
But they can't move it.
They can't move it, yeah. But they'll buck it up into
really?
lengths. Yes.
I've never seen that.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So how long a length will they buck is when you cut a log into rounds before you split it into pieces of firewood.
So if you're making firewood, 16 inches, right?
Yeah.
And it's funny because beaver, and I don't know why, seem to prefer a similar, it looks like cordwood except for the tapered at the end,
Really?
And they'll bloop, 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 and you can spot a spot where a tree has been felled and bucked because there's the wood chips at approximately every 16 inches along
Which you
the
would
ground.
totally, if you didn't know what was going on, probably assume implied human involvement.
Yeah, they do look a little like somebody was whacking at something with a hatchet.
Yeah.
Right? So beavers have these really impressive teeth. They grow continuously for the beaver's life.
Which is true of all rodents.
Yeah, and the front of them are orange, which I from what I understand, there's like a heavy iron component that keeps that front dentin hard.
Yep.
And so they're self-sharpening.
Yep.
These little chisels, and it's impressive. They can fell very big trees. Now, why they choose sometimes to fell big trees is interesting. Beavers being territorial, they'll be managing a woodlot, if you will, a riparian area of trees and shrubs and the grasses and forbs through their lineage, through generations. Sometimes they'll pass up a tree for many, many, many years, and then one day it's like, that's the tree.
So why do they do it?
Well, I don't have a good example or explanation for, there's something more complicated going on.
So what you're saying is you see a pattern in which there is obviously some sort of, I'm not arguing that it's conscious. We don't know how a beaver's mind works, but
there's intentionality.
There's some choice to now I fell that one. And it could be that it is managing the habitat, right? In other words, you liberate other trees that are struggling to get enough light, for example, by felling a big tree.
Yep.
And that might be the reason that one goes. And so again, this might be a management issue of parameters that make the habitat more productive of things that the beavers are eating
And there's a whole conversation with the plant too, and the chemical defenses that plants put out to avoid browsers, right?
Yep.
So every plant has their various phenolic compounds and whatever that they're spending some budget of energy on chemical defense.
So we will, this audience, the DarkHorse audience will have heard Heather and me talk many times about secondary compounds. These are compounds that don't have a function inside the plant or the fungus or whatever that is producing them. Their purpose is to interact with animals, usually to poison them so that they will move on and eat something else. So anyway.
And they taste bitter.
Right.
Well, animals have developed a taste for this.
We have evolved the ability to detect these things.
Oh, that's a poison.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And in fact, as you know, you've been to the tropics, and there's lots of things out there that are obviously fruits, but it's not obvious whether or not you can eat them.
Right.
But there is a trick, which is, you take a little fruit and you put it on your tongue, and if it tastes bitter, you don't eat that thing. And if it tastes good, then you can gently explore it.
Proceed with caution.
Yes, this trick has never killed me.
Yeah.
Not yet, at least.
Not yet.
Not yet.
You being here is
right. That is proof
good
positive
evidence
that so far it has worked.
Yeah, well, beavers do the same thing. Sometimes you'll see them nicking into a tree. You'll see like one little nick, and they didn't choose to cut that tree, and then you'll see 3 or 4 nicks along, and then somebody's coming down. And an interesting thing too is it seems to be, if you're a plant and you're low, you're expecting more browsers, and so you're going to spend more of your energy producing these phenolic compounds, these bitter tannins to keep browsers at bay. But as you grow high, well, that doesn't make sense to spend all that budget anymore on chemical defense because you're above the height of the grazers and browsers. And so beavers kind of come in and subvert that by whacking the tree down.
Yeah.
And then they'll eat all the foliage and the cambium layer from the massive tree that's stopped spending money or energy
on these poisons.
Yeah.
That is so interesting.
And then you can watch the deer come in. Everybody loves it when a beaver drops a big tree because suddenly you have a very sweet food source sitting there.
That's mind-blowing, actually. No, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Why defend against the browsers if you're tall and they can't
Exactly.
reach you, but the beaver has this other, it's a little
Those
bit...
chisels.
Yeah, it's reminiscent to me of the way a strangler fig reverses the tables on the other trees in a tropical forest, where, in general, the problem for every tree in a tropical forest is you start out on the forest floor where there's almost no light. Like 1% of the incident light actually makes it to the forest floor, and you've got to wait an awful long time before a gap opens up, right? And so most would-be trees just die of light starvation before they ever get a chance. And strangler figs start, well, at least often at the top. They start, a bat will eat a fig and drop a seed in, a crevice in a tree that's accumulated some dirt, and the tree grows down from above where there's plenty of light. And now it has a water problem, weirdly. But anyway, this strikes me as that same sort of thing where the natural logic of the forest has been outthunk by one creature, and there are all sorts of consequences for other creatures of, suddenly that tree just came, though vibrant and alive, just came crashing out of the canopy, and you can browse it temporarily. That's really cool.
Yeah. And it seems consistent with some of the observations I've made too, where sometimes you'll walk a section and it seems like there should be beaver here. And you'll see sign that beavers have moved through, but they haven't decided to settle. There's plenty of water. It seems like a good spot. And I'm seeing lots of green things.
Yeah.
But then you go look at the green things, and consistently I see this in areas with like heavy elk browse or public land cattle grazing browse, where you look at the typical plants beavers would be eating, and they've been munched and munched and munched and munched, and they've got this kind of like dwarfed bonsai look going. And my mind immediately says, well, that's a very bitter plant.
Right. That is a plant that has responded with toxins, and it's probably not worth the beaver's time.
It's probably not worth. So to our human minds, we're looking at lots of green stuff. But I feel like there's this underlying conversation between the plants and the browsers.
They build a lodge, pair mates for life.
I didn't finish out the lodge story.
Yeah.
So in a context where they've been successful and they've laterally, across a valley wetted the system, and they've got this spongy wetland of habitat that's growing all this stuff that they're eating, and then they have to build a lodge. But if they're in a system where there's a high bank convenient to deep water, then they can just build a tunnel up into that bank, and it saves a lot of effort. And so a lot of times you'll also see beavers denning in banks where they can create that air pocket. Usually they'll choose to den under the root structure of some big deciduous tree to help avoid predators digging in on them, right? That provides like this lattice work of wood bulwarks against digging predators. Also
sort of strikes me as reminiscent of the shoring up of mine shafts.
Yeah, totally. It looks that way. You've got these arching timbers over a hollowed out space. I don't know what the tree thinks about having all that activity under it, but they'll often choose to go do that, and we see more of that in the context of today's landscape because, of course, many of our creeks have collapsed into these systems where you like look down at the creek from up on the flat, which is just an unnatural thing.
Not normal, huh?
Yeah, not in the northern hemisphere.
Interesting. So, what would it look like?
Well, so you read some of the old trapper journals. Right, like how do we peer back into the misty past at our baseline for what this is skewed. What you can't go to Grinnell's journals, the naturalist who came through and kind of recorded what he was seeing, because that was post beaver trapping. So you've got a little bit on trapping journals and some of the maps that were being produced, and just some of the accounts where you'll hear about a party that would come off of a ridgetop, and they get to a valley and they'd spend a day or two trying to find a spot to cross the valley, because it's just one epic beaver wetland. It's just a spongy, wild world. And they would find usually a beaver dam to cross. And these beaver dams had persisted on the landscape so long that you could actually walk horses and wagons across these things. These things were wide and deeply rooted.
Do you have, Mel? Obviously, you're telling me it's a little hard to figure it out because the evidence wasn't well preserved. But any idea how long a history, a beaver dam that you could take horses and
yeah, right. Like
how old is
how old is that?
Yeah.
Well, that gets into kind of do these things get passed down? We know they get passed down, right? We've got these families that are tending these things, but it's not as simple as you've got your natal family and they defend it against all others.
Yeah.
There's many accounts of actually beaver families taking in refugees. Even some of the early accounts from 150 years ago, there's this one author, Enos Mills, describes this account where wildfire came through an area. And one of the places beavers were living was very pitchy, and the trees were close, and it cracked all their lodges open, and it destroyed the habitat. And there was a number of 30 beavers living in this spot. And then a few miles away, down a drainage and up another drainage, there's another habitat where beavers are living, but they've successfully created that sponge that buffered them from the fire completely. The fire got down to the water, it didn't burn, it moved on, and they had a spot there that was working. And he tracked the beavers whose habitat had been completely destroyed as they went down the stream looking for a new spot, but then turned right and went up and over the hill at exactly the point where it was the shortest distance to the habitat that was across the ridge, and then down and joined the beavers in the pond that had survived. And so and there was no sign of conflict.
Right.
So we don't know, how these things are passed. We know that there's these familial ties.
Right.
We know there's these territories, and these. I don't know how long these things grow roots too, because you think about willow, right?
Yep.
Beavers are clipping it into little segments, and they're jamming it into these dams that are built of mud and willow sticks, and then those willow sticks root.
Yeah.
The willows have gotten wise to the fact.
You can plant a willow from a cutting, and
Exactly.
so they're effectively doing that.
Yeah, and so a dam that's only even 3 years old will be starting to literally root into the landscape.
So let me ask you. There are so many things I want to ask you. Obviously, nobody knows in that case of these beavers who were taken in as refugees. Mm-hmm. My prediction, based on what I think I know about biology, will be that they were closely related.
Sure.
But it's also possible that reciprocal altruism could do it, where the beavers that had that piece of habitat that had functioned could, if they were limited in their reproductive rate and they could have used the labor of more beavers than they had, it's possible. It's a little hard to imagine that, because you would think that beavers could produce enough baby beavers to fill up that valley. But in any case, something interesting has to be going on.
There's interesting stuff that we don't understand. There's a lot of accounts of digging a canal to move water into a different system, to then build a dam and flood to access it. Like, say you've got a really great stand of aspen over here.
Yeah.
Right? But the stream is intermittent. There's not enough to dam to get to the aspen. There's many accounts of beavers. They dig canals across the landscape, and they'll divert water into an adjacent system, then utilize that water by building a dam, and then log out the aspen grove. And again, they're doing this with no foreman.
It's like a flume.
Right? Yeah, sure. Yeah, a canal.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. And, as you probably remember from class back in 2010 or whatever, one of the things I'm interested in is ways that evolution solves longer-term problems than you would think it could,
right,
based on lineage selection and explorer modes. And so, anyway, this strikes me as a good case that one might go pursue those things and discover that, what has to be true for the reward of, investing in a canal to a habitat that isn't wet enough, pays off. Well, that can very easily be true if you're dealing with a lineage level phenomenon, for sure.
Yeah. And to your point about age of Beaver Dam 2, there's this stream called Spawn Creek outside Logan, Utah, and when you go walk up it, there's a number of beaver dams, and it's a very high gradient creek. So they'll build a 12-foot tall beaver dam, and it doesn't buy them a lot of pond before they need to build another beaver dam, right? Because the stream is steep enough that, whereas like in a low gradient valley, you can build a 2-foot beaver dam and get acreage, right? So you walk up this stream, and then you'll notice that there's these stair steps of calcium in the stream as well. And they're these funny things. They're like these benches of calcium. Hypothesis being those are more or less fossilized beaver dams that the calcium carbonate precipitated out over a very long period of time. And aspen being what they are, that being has been there for a very long time. And so beavers have been there for a very long time too.
This makes some, I've wondered about this looking at beaver ponds for so long, how it's like they are a standing wave, right? And you have to start thinking in terms of an equilibrium, and you have to start thinking about Dawkins of course uses beavers to elucidate his concept of extended phenotype, which I think is actually, it's a great concept. And beavers really are a tremendous exemplar of this, where, if you're just looking at the animal, you're really not looking at the animal, because the animal is all of the consequences of the animal that make the animal possible, right? Including making its own little lakes, right? That's an amazing thing. But if you then project it through time, and the point is, well, a lake once made is valuable at lineage level, and a lake once made is a way of bootstrapping your way to some location that was too far to be useful, right? The possibilities that are opened by an animal that can terraform and can do so over centuries or potentially millennia that's a very powerful force, much more so than the rodent from which it's built.
Indeed, yeah, and some of us use the term beaver as a verb sometimes. Like that system has been beavered.
Has been beavered, yeah. Makes sense.
I mean, to kind of Dawkins' portrayal of it, the animal is bigger than the furry thing you're seeing. A system that is beavered, that brings a lot of explanation as to how that complex system is working.